Many say I am a time traveler or a visitor from a parallel world. But all I know is that on a summer day in 1954, I landed at Haneda Airport in Tokyo, only to be told that my country, Taured, did not exist. So let me tell you what happened that day. It was a routine business trip, or at least it should have been. I had made this journey countless times before, and so I approached the customs counter with my briefcase firm in my grasp and with my passport already extended before they could ask. I expected efficiency, but this time, something was different. The officer took my passport and froze. A flicker of confusion passed over his face, quickly masked, but noticeable to a man accustomed to reading expressions. I realized that something was wrong. He flipped through the pages as if searching for a missing piece to a puzzle that had no solution. Seconds stretched into something longer, heavier. He glanced at his colleague and muttered something in Japanese. A second officer joined him, then a third. A ripple of unease passed through me. Finally, the first officer looked up and asked me, "Sir, would you mind stepping aside for a moment?" I tightened my grip on the handle of my briefcase, and with a forced smile, I finally asked if something was wrong. But after my question, there was another pause and another round of shared glances. They kept talking among themselves so that I couldn't hear anything. And they talked for a long time before finally telling me that my passport looked like it wasn't valid. "That's impossible," I said, keeping my voice steady. "It was issued by my government just like it always has been." But I didn't get any reaction to that. Not even the slightest flicker of acknowledgement. No nod of understanding. Instead, I got another question. One that sounded so absurd that I almost laughed at the glass. They asked me which country I'd come from. I didn't understand why they were asking me that, but I answered anyway that I came from Taured. I had spoken it without hesitation, without the slightest doubt, because how could there be doubt? It was a fact as solid as the ground beneath my feet. However, no matter how trivial all of this seemed to me, the officers just kept looking at me in silence. Some more time passed, and I felt like they were expecting me to say something else, but I didn't know what. I had answered everything they asked me. My thoughts were interrupted by a policeman when he said, "Taured does not exist." I let out a short, breathless laugh, shaking my head as if I'd misheard. Surely I had misheard. "I beg your pardon?" I asked as if I expected him to correct himself. But he didn't. Instead, he repeated his statement, slower this time, each word measured and deliberate, as if explaining something painfully obvious to a lost child. "There is no such country," he said. I blinked at him. I didn't understand what was happening or if this was some kind of joke, but judging by their expressions, it didn't seem like one. My brain demanded an explanation, but as the silence between us continued, it became clear that I wasn't going to get one. The only thing I knew at that moment was that something heavy was pressing against my chest, and it did not feel good at all. "This must be a mistake," I said finally, this time with a slightly sharper voice, hoping they would stop with their joke and let me enter the country. In panic, I started explaining that I had already been to Japan, that I had arrived at this very airport before, and that my passport had been stamped there. I advised them to check the records, telling them they would surely see it, but none of them wanted to check anything. They didn't even move. They just kept looking at me seriously. Then another figure stepped forward, a man in a higher-ranking uniform. He was the supervisor. I hoped he would solve this big misunderstanding, but my hope disappeared the moment he spoke to me and said, "Sir, we will need to verify some things." By then, I was already sure that something was wrong. As I watched other passengers pass through without any problems, walking freely through the airport, I felt like I didn't belong there, and I was afraid. But what I didn't know was that this was only the beginning of events that would completely change my life. I was escorted from the customs counter to a separate room. It was a small, windowless room with a single table in the center and chairs positioned on either side. I was led to one and told to sit. They were polite. Too polite, in fact. But I could feel the shift in the air and the tension that was there. An officer placed a large world map on the table in front of me and asked me to show him where Tard was. It was a ridiculous question, but I was glad to have another chance to explain myself. Without hesitation, I pointed to the country I had just flown from, a small nation located between France and Spain. "There," I said, meeting their eyes, "exactly where it has always been." But their expressions did not change. If anything, one of the officers tapped the spot I had just pointed to. "This," he said slowly, "is Andorra." I quickly looked down at the map, sure that the officers had made a mistake. And just as I was about to say the name of the country I had pointed to out loud, I realized, on the map in front of me, it really did say Andorra. Nowhere did it say Taured, the name of the country that had been there my entire life. I remember that moment of realization. My mouth went dry. I wanted to explain everything to them, but not much came out. "That's wrong. This is a mistake," was all I managed to say. As the officers remained silent, I began pulling out my currency and other documents, trying to show them that I was telling the truth, that they had to believe me. I kept talking. "I don't know what's happening here, but I assure you, I am from Taured. I was born there. I have lived there my entire life. I have a home and a job. This is not some misunderstanding." But no one believed me. From the look on their faces, I could tell that even they didn't understand what was happening. My passport, my bank account, my belongings, everything was authentic in every way, and yet somehow none of it existed in their system. I do not know how long I sat there staring at that map. Nothing made sense to me anymore, and I didn't even try to explain it to myself. I was tired and just stayed silent. And then, just like that, the officers decided on the next step. They gave each other commands in Japanese. I didn't understand what they were saying, but I knew they were taking me out of this room and leading me somewhere outside the airport. For some reason unknown to me at that moment, they acted as if I were some kind of criminal. As they escorted me, I was surrounded. My briefcase, my documents, and everything I owned were taken from me. I was given no explanation. I remember being led down a long corridor until we finally left the airport. They took me to a hotel near the airport, a nondescript place meant for layovers and missed flights. But I was not here for rest. Two men followed me up the narrow hallway. They unlocked the door to a small, sterile room, the kind where no one stays for more than a night. I stepped inside. The walls were bare. In the room there was a single bed, a small nightstand, and a window that could not be opened. They came inside with me, and then the questioning began again. But this time, I learned more about their suspicions. One of the officers placed my passport on the table between us and tapped it with a single finger. "Who are you really?" he asked, slightly aggressively. But I was still sure of myself. I had nothing to hide, and I still believed that this situation would be resolved quickly. "I've told you," I said, with a thinner voice than I would have liked. "I am from Taured. I have nothing to hide." The officer across from me exhaled slowly, as if disappointed by my answer. The only thing he said was that Taured did not exist. I opened my mouth to argue, but what could I say that I hadn't already said? The proof they demanded was right there in front of them, and yet it meant nothing. Then came the real questions. They asked about my travels, my business, my contacts. They demanded to know why my documents were so perfect, and yet, according to them, they were from a country that didn't exist. They searched for a hole in my story, waiting for a slip, a mistake, or anything that would reveal a hidden truth. And with each answer I gave, I saw the same conclusion taking shape behind their eyes. They thought I was a spy. It was absurd and terrifying at the same time. I insisted again and again that I was telling the truth, that I had been here before, that I had no hidden agenda, no reason to lie. But the truth did not matter. They had already made their decision. After what felt like hours, the lead officer leaned forward and informed me that I would be staying in this room overnight because they needed time for their investigation. But even though the officers left, they did not leave me alone. 2 guards stood outside my door to make sure I had no chance of escaping. I sat in silence on the small bed, staring at the wall, trying to find answers to questions that clearly had no answer. I even remember thinking that I was slowly losing my mind, that something was wrong with me, or that this was just a dream I would soon wake up from. Other explanations crossed my mind too. Maybe this was all just one big government conspiracy, a test I had unknowingly walked into. Maybe I had stumbled upon something I was not meant to see, and this was their way of containing me. My own thoughts exhausted me from all the effort I had spent trying to explain to myself what had happened, and I fell asleep without even realizing it. And then, I was gone. The guards stood at my door all night, making sure I did not leave the room. Even my door had been locked the entire night. The window, though large, was sealed shut and designed never to open. There was no fire escape, no passageway, no hidden corridor that could have provided an escape route. And yet when they came for me in the morning, they found only an empty room. The bed was untouched, even though I clearly remembered falling asleep in it. And yet the sheets were perfectly smooth, as if no one had ever slept there. But the real shock came when they realized that I was not the only thing that had disappeared. Everything I owned, all of my belongings that had been taken from me at the airport, had vanished along with me. Panic first appeared among the guards. They had to quickly come up with an explanation for my disappearance because they were the ones responsible for watching me. And the worst part was that they had been watching me all night. The police, along with the guards, immediately organized a search. They searched the hotel lobby, every hallway, every staircase, but they could not find me. They even searched the surrounding streets and asked the staff, hotel guests, and even passers-by outside. But no one had seen anything. Then they went back to the airport. They checked every security camera, every possible entrance and exit, every checkpoint, but they found nothing there either. I had simply vanished. They had no idea how anyone could disappear like this under government watch. They searched for me for days, but they never found me. The only thing left behind were reports filed by the customs officers who had first questioned me at the airport. You must be wondering, where did I go? Well, the thing is, I don't remember. I don't know the answer to that question either. Was there some force, some unseen hand that reached out and plucked me from this reality, placing me back where I belonged? Perhaps, for a moment, I had slipped through the cracks of existence, fallen into a world that was never meant for me. Maybe the balance was restored, the error corrected, and my presence erased as if it had never been. But if that were true, why do I not remember the return? If I was pulled back into my world, why do I have no memory of that shift? Shouldn't I recall waking up in my own bed, in my own home, in the country I knew to be real? Shouldn't I remember feeling relief, clarity, some proof that I had not lost my mind? From the day I landed in Tokyo, nothing has made sense. I even asked myself if my entire existence had been erased from reality. This thought haunts me the most. I have always wondered if something or someone, at the moment I closed my eyes, decided that I did not belong, not just there, but anywhere. And if I, along with my entire existence, disappeared, then it's no surprise that all my documents and belongings vanished too, right? It would explain why the officials searched, why they found nothing, because there was nothing left to find. But even this does not make sense, because if I had been erased, I wouldn't be able to ask these questions now, even if I have no idea where I am. Some of you might think I simply slipped into a parallel world, another version of Earth. And maybe you're right, because I swear, in the world I come from, there is a country called Taured. That thought has crossed my mind too. But then I wondered, why was I the only one to experience something like this? If I wasn't, I would have found someone else with a similar story by now. Or at least, there would be people who also remember my country, what our flag looked like, our history, and our leaders. Others might think I am a time traveler, and you might be right too. I can't say it's impossible that I came from a future where my country exists and somehow ended up in Japan in 1954. Maybe I crossed my real border long before I crossed Japan's that day. Call me whatever you want. A man who crossed from one reality into another, or a man who is proof of parallel worlds. I actually believe I am trapped between them. And if you have ever experienced the Mandela effect, you will know what I'm talking about. You know, that strange phenomenon where groups of people remember events, names, and facts differently from the world around them. You've probably had a moment where you could swear that Mr. Monopoly wore a monocle, only to find out that he never had one on any box. Well, what if I am just living through that effect every single day? Believe me, I have thought about every possible scenario so many times. But the truth is, I still don't know. And maybe I don't need to know at all. Because now, as I have told you my story, you sit there, in your world, in your reality, believing that the ground beneath your feet is solid, that your history is written in ink that cannot be smudged, that the past and the present are immutable, fixed, unshaken. I am not saying that I am not some kind of anomaly. My story is probably just a mistake that was quickly erased. But what if you are the one who is out of place? Perhaps somewhere in another version of history, in another version of this world, you are the story someone else is telling. The person who does not belong, the one who is remembered but never found. So I leave you with this question. Are you truly sure your world is as solid as you believe it to be? If my story made you question what you think you know, give this video a thumbs up and subscribe for more mysteries like this one. Keep your minds open, and until we meet again,